Hello sew buddies, hi and welcome back to the channel. To our new subscribers, thanks for joining this wonderful family of creative designers and dressmakers. If you just came across this channel for the very first time, please do not make it your last. My name is Joy and I am the tutor and the convener for this channel way by Armhole. In today's tutorial is a highly requested one and it was such a pleasure making this video, I tell you. This is a mini dress with a 1/4 flare sleeve and this decorative net at the back with buttons. Without further ado, let's just jump right into the tutorial. The materials you need to make this dress are of course the fabric. Here I'm using a cotton fabric, also called Ankara. I'm using an Ankara of 3 yards, lining of 2 yards, 1 yard non-woven fusible interfacing for the fabric, 1 yard of paper interfacing for the lining, which is also fusible, and a fleece interfacing for the bust padding, also called wadding. You will also need tape and of course your scissors. As usual, we are starting with our basic bodice block. I did an in-depth tutorial on how to draft a basic bodice block using the Natalie Brace method, and I'll link it on the screen and also in the description box, so do well to watch that video so that you understand the steps needed to draft your basic bodice block. The horizontal line I'm drawing now is my shoulder to bust point, which is 10.5 inches, and I've also drawn my shoulder to under bust line, which is 14.25 in my case. I've gone ahead to mark the bust point X. Now coming to the under bust, my round under bust is 32 inches, so I'm doing 32 divided by 4, which is 8, because I'm working on 1/4 of my body, and it gave me 8 inches. So the next thing I've gone ahead to do is to mark out that 8 on the under bust line, making sure to skip the dart width on that line. After marking 8 inches, I've measured out the remaining space on that line, and in my own case it gave me 2 inches. Now what I'm doing basically is to share that 2 inches on the two dart sides. So I'm giving the left side 1.25 inches and the right 0.75. I didn't share them equally because I don't want the two darts to be too close together after sewing. After that, I've extended the dart to meet with the bust point using a straight line. Now from the bust point, I came down 0.5 inch and I also went up 0.5 inch. Going in with my straight rule, I'm linking the points down to the point at the under bust using broken lines, which will serve as temporary lines. I also did the same for the opposite side. Now the next thing I did is to measure the length of the broken line and divided it into 3 parts. Now I'm marking just a 1/3 of that line below, and I'm also doing the same for the opposite side. After that, I linked the under bust to the waist. Then going in with my French cuff, I linked the points together like so, and then I drew a straight line to complete the broken line below. The next thing I'm doing is to transfer this shoulder dart to a mid armhole dart. I have a video on the channel on dart manipulation and transfer, and I also link that on the screen and also in the description box. From the tip of the shoulder, I came down 3.5 inches to get my new dart point, then link that point to the bust point with a straight rule. Here I'm cutting the front pattern out to give me the liberty to transfer my dart. Now to transfer the dart, I simply opened up the shoulder dart, which is the dart on the pattern, as well as the new dart line, that is the mid armhole dart. Then I'm going to be closing the shoulder dart, and automatically that dart is transferred to the mid armhole dart. So basically that's how you do a slash and spread method of dart manipulation. There are actually 2 types of dart manipulation: the slash and spread and the pivotal method. So this is basically the slash and spread method. I explained everything in the dart manipulation video, which I've linked. To get my shoulder width for this dress, I measured out 2 inches from the shoulder tip, and I also came down from the neck 0.5 inch so that the neck depth is not too choky. You can actually leave it as it is, but I came down 0.5 inch, just my preference. I drew a straight line as base to help me draw the canoe neck well. Then going in with my French cuff, I drew the new neckline, which is basically a canoe neckline. After that, the front pattern is ready and it's time to cut out. Now going on to the back pattern, I also measured 2 inches for the shoulder, just like we did for the front, so that they can match up. And I also came down 0.5 from the neck. Now going in with my French curve again, I've linked these 2 points like so. Now from the new neck depth, I came down 10 inches. You can actually come down way more than 10 inches if you don't mind an exposing back. After that, I'm going to be linking the shoulder to that point with a French curve like so. This space now becomes the net. From the shoulder tip, I also came down 3.5 inches like I did for the front, and then I linked that to the dart point using the French curve, just to make the dart run all the way to the mid armhole, just like we did for the front. Now time to cut the down part of our pattern. Our back pattern is basically ready. Now these are all the pattern pieces for the upper bodice. Before making the pattern for the down part, I am measuring out the waist of the front and the back pattern because they are obviously not equal. This is because we are fuller in front at the waist than we are at the back. Hence the wider waist for the front and then the narrower one for the back. So my front waist is 8.25. that is if when it's on fold. Of course, when you open it, it becomes 16.5, and then my back waist is 6.5. when you open it up, it becomes 13, which if added, it will give you, if you add everything, is going to be giving you 29.5 inches, which is approximately 30 inches. My actual waist is 13 inches. So from the pattern, the waistline on the pattern is 29.5. so when I'm shaping it, I'm going to make sure it's exactly 30 inches. So I took note of that so that when drafting the down part, the waist matches. Now for the hip, just as the waist is not equal, the hip is also not equal. Naturally, you know that we are fuller at the back than we are in front. This is obvious because of the buttocks. So when you understand this body anatomy and incorporate it into your craft, you'll be able to make better fitting clothes with very little disparity from the body form. So these are all the things you have to take into consideration if you really want your craft to stand out. So for my hip is 40, but I'll be giving the front 19 inches and the back 21 inches. So if you do 19 plus 21, it will still give you 40 inches, which is my hip circumference. Now with that out of the way, let's now go into drafting the skirt or the down part of this dress. My half length is 17.5. that's why I'm starting at the 17.5 mark on the tape. So from there, I counted down 8 inches to get my hip line. So 8 inch, you can use 8.5 or 9 inch depending on how tall your torso is. So I've done that to get my hip line, marking 8 inches from my waistline. Then I marked my full length. My full length in this case is 36 inches. Then I've gone ahead to square that across. Now I'm coming to the waistline. From the center front, I'm measuring my waist, which is 8.25. Then remember, our front hip is 19, right? So when you divide 19 by 2, it's going to be giving you 9.5. So I've gone ahead to mark that 9.5 on that hip line. Then for the hem, what I did basically is subtract 0.5 inches from the hip. That's 9.5 minus 0.5, and marked it on that, which is 9 inches, and just marked it on that hip line. This is because I don't want it to be too tight around my upper knee, since it's going to be a mini dress, so that I can walk freely. So after that, I've gone ahead with my French curve to link these 3 points, and also of course with the straight rule to link that hip points to the hem points. Now from the waistline at the center front, I came down 0.75. then I linked it using my French curve to this side. This is because I want to eliminate that extra bulging fabric at the waist when the dress is worn. Now my front is ready, so I've gone ahead to label that front. Let's go on to the back. Moving on to the back, I first of all measured out the hip after a 0.5 inch mark from the front pattern. So I just moved 0.5 inch away from the front pattern, and then I measured the hip because it is the widest part on the pattern. So remember, for our back pattern, our back hip is 21 inches, remember. So yeah, I'm doing 21 divided by 2, which is 10.5. After marking that out, I went ahead to square this up and down. Now from the center back at the level of the waist, this new line that I just squared up and down is now our center back. So from there at the level of the waist, I'm coming in 1 inch because of that, natural curvature at the back, just at the waist area. Then with a French cuff, I'm linking it to the hip. Then from there, I marked out 6.5 for the back waist and I added 1 inch for the dart marking. That is 7 point, which is going to give us 7.5. 6.5 plus 1 is going to give you 7.5. So I'm going to have to mark that at the waist. Now with the French curve, I'm linking it to the hip, right? Now from the hip line at the center back, I'm coming down 7 inches and I'm going in 1 inch. You might be wondering, what am I doing at this point? I'm doing this because of that curvature at the back, the bum parts. With the French curve, I'm linking that hip to this new point. This is actually done to give contour to the bum so that it cups well and gives the desired fitting at the buttocks. So if you really want to have good fitting clothes, the center back is not just straight because you're not naturally straight at the back. You have to take into consideration all these curves so it gives it better fitting at that bum area. So after that, I've just linked this down the 1 inch. I just linked down the 1 inch to the end. Now to get the width of the hem, I subtracted 1 inch from the hip, just like we subtracted 0.5 from that of the front. For the back, what I did was to subtract 1 inch, of course, because the hip at the back is wider. So subtracting 0.5 will make that hem line too wide. So I did a 1 inch instead. So 10.5 minus 1 inch gave me a 9.5. So I've gone ahead to mark that at the hem. Then I linked it to the hip with a straight line. Now coming to the dart, I matched it with the up pattern so that it matches up to get the exact point so that they match at the end of the sewing project. Then from that point, I measured out 1 inch from the dart width. I found the midpoint of the dart, that's ½ inch. When you measure the width of the dart 1 inch, the midpoint is half. Then I measured down 5 inch from that midpoint, which is going to be the length of the dart. Then with my ruler, I'm linking the 2 dart legs like so. This is now going to be our back pattern. Now coming to the sleeve, I have a video on the channel already on how to draft a basic sleeve block. So we will be using the block to adapt to the flare sleeve of this dress, okay? So the first thing I'm doing is to fold the sleeve block at the midpoint like so. Then I've gone ahead to fold my fabric diagonally from a point so that the flare drapes better. When you fold on the bias, fold diagonally, it drapes better. Now I'm going in with my pattern. I measured from the point, that's from that particular point, like you see me doing, I measured 3.5 inches so that I can start measuring out the full length. Now this 3.5 inches is not a constant. Depending on how big your sleeve block is, you can actually come down more. The idea there is just to give it enough space that will accommodate the sleeve and also the extra 1 inch seam allowance that we are going to be adding for that sleeve, so that I can now start measuring out the full length from that 3.5 inch line. This is done so that the sleeve is equal all around. So just imagine that you're cutting a circle flare or a circle anything, you need a pivot point so that everything is equal at the hem. So I've marked that out. I've marked out the length of my sleeve, which is 25 inches. I'm using 25 inches for the sleeve length. You can actually make it longer. I think it's more beautiful when it's longer, but from my experience wearing this dress, I found out that a longer sleeve always scatters things, especially when I'm walking. Most times my sleeve will just hook something and I will not even know. So this particular tutorial, I decided to make it shorter. My previous dress, I have this is actually the third style I'm making. That's the third of this dress I'm making, and I'm doing this because you people requested for it. That's why I'm doing it. I've measured out my 25 inches and I've done that round the length of the sleeve. Then at the sleeve top, I added ½ inch for stitching. That's the cap of the sleeve where it will join to the main bodice. Then at the side seam, I added 1 inch for the side seam. Then to give it a little bit of fitting, like that curvy effect at the upper sleeve or at the upper arm, I just curved it in at the side like so. Then I linked it to the hem. But basically you can just leave it straight, you must not curve it. just preference, natural preference, my own preference. So I curved it. After that, it's now time to cut out my sleeve. I'm marking this X just to indicate the wrong side because it looks almost alike. The wrong and the right side looks almost alike, so I'm trying not to get confused when I'm stitching. Now, after cutting, I went ahead to trim down the front part of my sleeve because from the pattern it is not the same as the back. The details are actually what makes your final job stands out. So from your pattern, or if you actually watch the sleeve video, you realize that the front part of the sleeve is actually deeper at that sleeve cap. You know, it's actually came in deeper. So I want to take into consideration all those little details, okay, so that my dress stands out, and you know that place will not have any extra bulge or any extra fabric. Now, the detail is actually what makes your job stand out. So if you really want a superb job, then you have to take all these things into consideration. I also notched the back. I notched the back of the sleeve pattern so that I don't mix it up while stitching. Now, since the front and the back is not entirely alike, the front is deeper at that part, so I just notched the back to identify it when I'm sewing. So here I'm basically done with tracing the second sleeve. Of course, the sleeve is 2, so I'm tracing the second sleeve. And I've also gone ahead to notch the midpoint of the sleeve so that I can start stitching. So this is what the front piece look like. Here I have the front piece. I added 1.5 inch for side seam. I added 0.5 for the top part seam allowance, and I added 1.5 for the hem, which I'm going to use to turn up with the lining. And here I cut it on fold. As you can see, here is the lining. The lining is basically the same. The only difference is that the hem is shorter. So for the lining, I made it 2 inches shorter than the main fabric, so that when I'm sewing it, when I'm stitching it and I've turned it like so to join it with the lining, automatically it gives me my original length, which I've gone ahead to notch by this side. So that notch part is the original hem of the original length of 36 inches. Remember, from our cutting, my length is 36 inches, so that's what I've gone ahead to notch. So this is the back. Here the center back is 1 inch extra. I'm basically notching that's the zip part. I'm notching it to indicate. Here are my dart legs. I've also notched it. The side seam is 1.5, and then the hem is also 1.5 inch extra, just like we did for the front. And then the lining is 2 inch shorter, just exactly like the front, but the back has a dart, the front doesn't. So you see here, this is the net. The only thing I did for the net is just to add 0.5 inch seam allowance all round the net part, because we'll be needing that seam allowance to join to the back. So this is what the front piece look like. I've cut it on fold. The sides are 0.5 inch. The neck I made it 0.25. Then the side 0.5 inch. And the side seam like this is 1.5, so that it matches with, you know, the down part. I did exactly the same thing for the lining, and I've gone ahead to iron in my interfacing for both lining and my fabric. Remember the interfacing from the beginning. I've ironed it out. So now I'm marking out my padding part. I made it 5 inch wider. I'm just going to link it down to the under bust line, and then the top part from the bust point, I made it 4 inch. I took it 4 inch up and just linked it round like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and be doing the same thing for this midpoint. For the midpoint, I just came in 3 inches and then 4 inch up, you know, just to make sure it matches with this side like so. So I've marked out that part for the padding. Now this is what the back looks like. 0.5 inch seam allowance all round. Then the zip has 1 inch seam allowance, and then the side has 1.5 inch seam allowance. So yeah, this is what the front piece look like. I'm basically ready to start stitching. See my padding. For the padding, I didn't add any seam allowance. After cutting, I made sure that I didn't start from the end of the edge of my fabric, so that it's not too bulky after stitching. So yeah, I'm basically stitching together all the pieces using my 0.5 inch seam allowance like so. So yeah, I'm stitching the first side to the center front piece. Look at what it looks like. I love the way this bustier is just sitting. Even before ironing, it's already cupping well. Now this is me sewing in the second side of this front piece, making sure that I'm not stitching directly on the padding so that place is not too bulky, the seam is not too bulky. This is what it looks like even before ironing. The cup is definitely cupping. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did for the main piece on the lining, you know, just stitching it together. So after stitching, you always make sure to press open your seams, please. In between this sewing, I made sure to always be stitching be ironing my seams, you know, pressing where necessary. Although I did most of that, I did all of my ironing off camera, so just make sure, just know that in between I was ironing. So here I'm joining the back piece just like we did for the front, you know, joining it for the fabric and also the lining. This is the second back piece. I've gone ahead to, you know, join the two pieces together. Remember, the third puzzle for this back piece is the net, which we'll be doing after joining these two parts like so. Here I'm sewing the lining, you know, doing exactly the same thing we did for the main fabric on the lining. So coming into the front of the skirt part, I've opened it up and I'm starting to stitch with the right side facing each other. I'm stitching the hem first, the lining to the main fabric. I'm stitching it down at the hem. After that, the next thing I'm doing is to just pull it up to the waist part like so. And when I did that, automatically it pulled up that extra, you know, because the lining is shorter. So when you pull it up, automatically it pulls the fabric up and gives you your original length. So I'm gonna head to sew the sides. This is the second side I'm stitching. This dress I'm not doing an inside sewing, that's why I'm using the lining to, you know, cover it up first before turning. So if I were to do an inside sewing, what I'll do basically is to just go ahead and start shaping my front with my back, doing the same thing for the fabric and the lining. But since it's not an inside sewing, that's why I'm joining the lining to the main piece first. So yeah, I've basically flipped it to the right side and I'm going to go ahead and seal the waist part like so. Now, like I said, my front piece is not going to be having any darts. So coming to the back piece, the first thing I've gone ahead to do is to start sewing my darts. Remember, that is why we notched those dart legs so that we know where the dart position is. If you don't notch it, you might get confused and then you need the help of your pattern to help you know where your position is. So yeah, I'm gonna ahead to sew down the darts. I'm going to be doing the same thing for the second piece and also be doing the same thing for the lining. Remember, the length of the dart is 5 inch, so I'm making sure of that, making sure that I'm using a length of 5 inch, but you can actually use 5.5 or 6 inch. The difference is not so much. So after that, the next thing I'm doing is to place it and start stitching just like we did for the front, starting from the hem, right sides facing right sides. We sew the hem, and after stitching the hem, we just pull it up at the waist part like this and then seal the sides. So in this case, we are sealing the center back, and after that we'll seal the side of this back piece. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, you know, flip it to the right side and then seal the waist part. After flipping to the right side of this dress, you now sew in the waist part, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did for this piece for the second one. Please, if you're enjoying this tutorial, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on post notifications so that you get notified whenever we post new videos. We always make sure to post at least 3 videos every week. Thank you so much for, you know, being with me up to this very point. I just want to appreciate the love and support so far. So this is me sewing the second side of the back. I'm flipping it to the right side and then seal off the waist just like we did for the other piece. So after that, this is what my front piece looks like after ironing. Look how it's cupping deeply. I've ironed the lining and the main fabric, and it's time to join them together. So starting with the neckline, I'm joining this at the neckline, holding my allowance of 0.25. Remember, the neckline allowance was 0.25, and that's what I've gone ahead to stitch down like so. After this, I'm going to go ahead and notch this fabric, this part to release the tension at that neck part, because I'm going to be doing a top stitching. So whenever you're doing a top stitching on a curved part, you want to notch so that it eases off the tension, and then you have a smooth stitching without any wrinkles. So I've gone ahead to do that. This is what it looks like inside. And the next thing I'm doing is to join the lining to the fabric at the side, you know, holding it down at the side on both sides, right side facing right sides. After I've done that, I've gone ahead to flip it to the right side and then seal the waist part. After doing that, this is what it looks like. I love how deep this cup is. It's so beautiful. Now coming into the net, remember there's a net at the back, so before we, you know, join the lining to the main fabric, we need to tackle the net. So yeah, I'm sewing the neckline of this net. Remember the neck of the net, that's what I'm doing. I've gone ahead to sew it down like this. Now because of how delicate the net is, I didn't do a back stitch. I just started sewing, and then after that I knot this thread because I didn't want to destroy the net. The net is a very delicate fabric. So after tying it off, I've gone ahead to trim off the excess because I need that part to be almost seamless. So I've trimmed it off. Now for this first piece of the net, the side that is going to be bearing the buttons, I'm going ahead to seal down the center back like so, you know, to stitch it. This is the part of the net that will be having the buttons. Okay, after that I also went ahead to trim off just like we did for the neckline. Now after trimming off, I'm going to be flipping it to the right side, and after flipping it to the right side, the next thing I've gone ahead to do is to seal down that curvy part like so. So I'm going to seal it down just to hold the two pieces. Remember this net, I cut it into 4 parts. Sorry, I didn't mention that. I cut the net into 4 pieces so that when I'm stitching, I'm going to be using one for lining for one side and then the other one for lining for the other side. So when you are cutting your net, make sure to cut that into 4 pieces. All right. So yeah, I'm sewing the neck of the second one and then knotting it just like we did for the first one. Now this is the part that is going to be bearing the loop for the buttons. Okay, this is the one that will be bearing the button loop. So now for the loop here, I'm using this rounded elastic like so. It's sold in our local markets. You can always find it. This is an elastic. It's just like an half-inch elastic, but this one is just rounded. You see, this is what it looks like. So the next thing I'm doing is to go ahead and measure out 2 inch for each loop. So I'm measuring out 2 inch in length for each loop, and that's what I'm going to be using to form the loops like so. So here I'm cutting out my loops, making sure that they are all 2 inch. You can actually use 2.5, but at the end of the day you need to trim off, or depending on the size of your button you can make it longer. So yeah, I'm going to be using tiny buttons. That's why I'm making my loops smaller. So the next thing I'm doing here is to start fixing my loop, starting from the very top like so, and then I made the difference, the distance 1 inch. So the distance that one loop has from the other is exactly 1 inch. So my loops have a distance of 1 inch from each other basically. So yeah, I'm putting all my loops. So now after doing that, my loops are 12 in number. You can actually, if the depth of this net is longer, then it should be longer. it should be more in number. The loop should be more in number. So yeah, what I'm doing basically is to just seal it off using the second part, you know, just to secure it more, and then seal that off. I'm not going to be trimming the excess off because it's quite tricky. I don't want the loop coming out or maybe getting spoiled or something, so I just left it like as it is with the allowance. So now the next thing I'm doing basically is to start sewing it into the fabric. I've marked out my 1 inch seam allowance for my zip, and then when sewing from the shoulder part, I'm going to be coming in 0.5 inch from the shoulder, because you don't want to start from the shoulder tip. When you start from the shoulder tip, that means you're going to be, when you're joining the back shoulder to the front shoulder, you're not going to be having any seam allowance. So remember, you have to come down 0.5 inch from that shoulder and then start sewing in your net like so. If your measurements are right, it's going to match up exactly and stop at that 1 inch before the zip. So as you can see, mine stop exactly at that 1 inch before the zip. All right, so I've joined for the right side of my pattern piece, my back piece, sorry, and then I'm going to go ahead and join this left side that is going to be bearing the buttons. So basically I'm joining it with the main fabric at the back. So after doing this, the next thing I'm doing is to come in with my lining. Here you want to sandwich that net in between the lining and the main fabric, you know, just like you do a round neck for the back, but the only difference now is that you have a net in between. So you want to now sew it right side facing right side, sewing it down at the neck. After doing that, I also went ahead to, you know, notch. You really need to notch at this point, especially if you're going to be doing a top stitch, because of that very curvy area just before where the zip allowance is. So yeah, I'm gonna ahead to do that notch, and after the notch I'm going to go ahead and do a top stitch. So after that, next thing I'm doing is to seal the side lining to fabric, right side facing each other. I'm sealing this side, and after sealing this side, next thing I'm doing is to seal that zip part like so. We're also going to be sealing the zip part, and after that, remember our zip was 1 inch, so after taking in 0.5 inch to seal, our zip allowance now becomes 0.5 inch. So take that into consideration. The side seam was 1.5 inch seam allowance, and after holding it down with 0.5 inch with the lining, the side seam now becomes 1 inch. So now you see why we added 1.5 inch. But if you were just to do the normal inside sewing, then you just need to go ahead and add your 1 inch without the extra 0.5 inch to it. So yeah, I'm just sewing down my neck just like we did for the other piece. So stitching down my neck, after stitching, next I'll do is to notch it and then give it a top stitch. I know you might be wondering, why do we always give a top stitch, especially to the neck area and sometimes to the armhole? It's because we don't want the lining to start poking out of our main piece, especially if you're using a lining that is lighter than the fabric. The tendency for it to rub against your skin and then start peeking out from the fabric is very high. So you want to do that top stitch so that it helps hold down your lining from the inside. So it's more like a pull holding the lining from the inside, then automatically just the fabric covers the lining well, and then it's not peeking out when you wear it. It's always advisable to use the same fabric weight for your lining and the fabric, because they tend to behave the same. So when you don't use the same fabric weight, the tendency for the lining to, you know, start shooting out is very high. So that's why we always do a top stitch, and since then it has just become a culture to do this top stitch, whether lightweight lining or no lightweight lining. So I'm gonna have to seal the sides, flip it to the right side, and then seal the down part. Here I'm joining the back piece to the front piece at the shoulder like so. I hope by now you already know how to join your shoulders, but if you don't already know that, what I'm doing basically for the shoulder is to use the back piece and then wrap it round the front piece that's sandwiching it. So I'm going to be illustrating it in the second shoulder slowly when I'm doing that. So what I'm doing here is to just seal the armhole, as you can see, just to seal the armhole and get it ready for shaping, and then to start fixing the sleeves. All right, so let's come into the shoulder again. Like I explained, this is the back piece facing me, and I'm just going to wrap the front piece round, using the back piece to wrap it inside, and after that I'm just going to stitch it down. So it's more like you're putting the front piece in between the main fabric and the lining of the back piece, and then you just wrap it round and stitch it down. That's just it. So after that, again, we are going in to seal the armhole like so. After sealing the armhole, it's time for us to now start shaping this dress to our desired fit. So now here I'm matching the front at the waist part, just to give me an idea of where my midpoint is. So from that midpoint, I'm measuring 8.25. Remember, our waist from the pattern for the front is 8.25. I'm going to go ahead and measure that on both sides. So 8.25 on one side and 8.25 on the other side. Now going into the back, remember our zip allowance 0.5 now, then from there I'm marking 6.5. The waist for the back is 6.5. just remember, if you followed this tutorial from the beginning, you will know why I did an explanation on why the waists are not equal. In fact, the waist, the hip and the bust are not equal for both the front and the back. So here we are going in 0.5 again at the bust, and measuring for the bust. My bust is 37, so I'm sharing it 17, 20. So 20 for the front, 17 for the back, and I've gone ahead to mark that 17 divided by 2 for the back, which is 8.5. Then for the front, coming into the front, see how I'm measuring it, making sure to dip that tape inside that cup. Remember, the front is not now straight, so after measuring it, it gave me 23. So what I'm going to do basically is 23 minus 20, which is 3, and then that 3 I'm going to be sharing it on both sides like so. That's just how I do my shaping, so that everything is equal. If you follow the seam allowance directly, like remember our seam allowance for this part after joining it to the lining is 1 inch. If you follow it like that, you might not get it exactly. Reasons being that during frequent ironing and stitching, your fabric tends to either stretch or shrink. So you want to remeasure and make sure that there is no error at the end. If it's signs, they'll say error due to parallax. So just take this as that error due to parallax. So here, coming into the sleeve, I feel like I'm talking too much actually. Coming to the sleeve, I'm sewing the hem like so, doing a roll hem. Because I don't have a roll hem foot, I'm just going to first of all fold it the first time, just fold it a bit. Then coming in the second time, I'm going to sew this down like so the second time, right? So that's how I get my roll hem. Especially you use that roll hem especially for curved hems. If you want to sew a curved hem, it's ideal for you to use a roll hem to achieve that, so that it doesn't have any squeezes at that point. So yeah, I'm sewing the second sleeve, sewing it the second time, and after that I'm now going to start joining it to my main fabric, or to my main piece, the upper bodice. Remember, we notched the back to differentiate it from the front, so you want to take that into consideration when joining. Don't just join blindly. Make sure the back is for the back and the front is for the front, and make sure the midpoint matches. All right, when you've done that, you see that everything sits nice and smooth. Like I told you, all these tiny details I'm taking my time to explain is the reason why your jobs will come out superb. It's the reason why you have a very neat job. So yeah, after joining the sleeve to the bodice, what I'm using to seal the side is a French seam, because I do not want to serge. I don't want to do any serging at that side seam for the sleeve. I just only want the rough part of this dress to be the armhole and the waist. That's the only part I want to serge. I don't want to serge this side seam for the sleeve. That's why I'm doing a French seam. So you know how to do a French seam. I did a detailed tutorial on the channel. I'll also be linking that down. So I've gone ahead to do that French seam for the sleeve, and this is what it looks like. Now going into the second sleeve, I've gone ahead to join it, and this is me basically doing the French seam for the second sleeve. Joining the sleeve to the main fabric is pretty easy and straightforward, especially if you've done your notches to indicate where your midpoint and the back is. So this is me doing the French seam, and this is what it looks like. Now coming to the down part of this dress, I've also notched the midpoint of the waistline of the front, and then marking my 8.25 just like we did for the up waist. 8.25 on both sides. Remember, the hip of the front is 19, so I'm going to be making sure of that. After checking it, I shed the excess on both sides of my front like so, and then I'm just going to take that down. Coming into the back, after marking my that notch is where the zip is going to sit. I've marked it, and then remember the back hip is 21, so 21 divided by 2 is 10.5, and I've gone ahead to mark it for the first part, and then this is me basically doing the same thing for the second side of the back. All right, so after doing this, I'm going to mark this line as a guide, so that when I'm now joining it to the front piece, I'm just going to be following that line while shaping, while joining the two pieces together. Now if you're a beginner, I advise you to use your pins. Please use the pins to match the lines together before stitching, that way you get it exactly. Now coming to the center back, I've gone up 3 inches for the slit and come down 10 inches for the zip, and then from that point where the zip stops, I'm going to be sewing it down all the way to the point where the slits starts. All right, so because this is a mini dress, I just came up 3 inches, so this is me sewing it a second time just to secure that part because of the tension that will be happening there. So for the slits, I'm just going to go ahead and iron it with my hemming gum and then tack it in. Now I'm joining the upper part to the down part. If all your measurements are right, all these points and pinning should match. The side seam of the up should match with the side seam of the down. The darts should match. The midpoint should match. Everything should match. That is if your measurements are right. If they don't match up, then you have to remeasure to make sure that nothing is different, that the up is not bigger than the down, or that the down is not bigger than the up part. All right, so you just want to make sure of that. So here I'm matching it up, and as you can see, they all matched. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to start stitching it down together, joining the up piece to the down piece of this dress to now make it an actual dress. Okay. Now after joining it like so, the next thing I'm going to be going ahead to do is to fix my zip, which I've done off camera. This is what it looks like. As you can see, all the points are joining. I love the look of this dress already. Now after finishing up my zip, you can guess the next thing is to fix my buttons. Here I use the same fabric for the button of this dress. You can actually just buy tiny buttons, small buttons in the market, but just to give you that extra oomph, I had to use the fabric to make the buttons, and this is what it looks like. I mean, this dress is really beautiful. I love the fit. I love the way it cupped at the bum part, the buttocks part. All those tiny details we did, it can show in the final fit of this dress. I love the way the sleeve lays, from the armhole part, the way it just lays flat. I just love everything about this dress. I love the back, the net, the way it just laid flat at the back. The fit is just perfect. I love the way everything looks. Tell me if you really love this tutorial. Tell me the difficulty level. I always try as much as I can to explain everything for you, just to give you the secrets of why professional dressmakers dresses stands out, while just to give you those tiny secrets of why most people's dresses look so superb and some people's own looks homemade. So all these little details I pointed out in this tutorial are the things that can make your work stand out. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the very end. I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. Okay, let me let you go. Until next time, bye.